it hard to play. I'll just tell you, I love this song. It's hard to play because I can't get the timing right. So it makes it hard to sing together because you don't know when I'm going to come in and when I'm not. Let's just do our best. It's a beautiful song. I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk close to Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of toil and snares, if I falter, Lord, who cares? Who with me my burden shares? None but Thee, dear Lord, none but Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. When my feeble life is o'er, time for me will be no more. I'll be gently, safely roll to Thy kingdom shore, to Thy shore. Just a closer walk with Thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be.
Praise God.
All right, 503. What a wonderful change in my life has been wrought since Jesus came into my heart. I have light in my soul, for it's all I have sought since Jesus came into my heart. Since Jesus came into my heart. Since Jesus came into my heart. Floods of joy o'er my soul, like the sea. from my wandering and going astray, since Jesus came into my heart. And my sins, which were many, are all washed away, since Jesus came into my heart. Since Jesus came into my heart, since Jesus came into my heart, floods of joy o'er my soul, like the sea of gold. Since Jesus came into my heart, I shall go there to dwell in that city I know, since Jesus came into my heart. And I'm happy, so happy, as onward I go, since Jesus came into my heart. Since Jesus came into my heart, since Jesus came into my heart, floods of joy o'er my soul, like the sea of gold. Since Jesus came into my heart. All right, number 11, and then we'll get into our Bible study in Genesis, and we're almost through with Genesis, and we're going to do Exodus a little differently when we get there. You'll see what I'm talking about. Number 11. Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy praise. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs about his praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise his name, I'm fixed upon it, name of God, redeeming love. Hitherto thy love has blessed me, thou hast brought me to this place, and I know thy hand will bring me safely home by thy good grace. Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. He to rescue me from danger, bought me with his precious blood. Oh, to grace how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for thy courts above. Amen. Genesis chapter 49. This chapter is somewhat seemingly uninteresting to most. And I say that because some of you were with us when we went through the sons, all 12 of them, and what their names mean, and the order they were born in. And some people just don't get real revved up about genealogy. And some people don't really care what your name means. I mean, average person couldn't tell you what the name Chad means, and that's okay. I mean, I don't think we all really look into that, worry about that too much. But I'm a firm believer that God puts all of these things in here for a reason. And we can always get something out of it if we come with our heart
intending for that. If our heart's in the place it ought to be, then we're prepared to have whatever God's trying to show us. And so I'll have you remember that in the last chapter, Joseph comes to his father because word is he's not doing very well. In fact, he's at the end of his life. He doesn't have long. And so when Joseph comes, he has his boys there with him. And you'll remember we went over this. But he blesses Joseph's boys, and in fact blesses them backwards. You'll remember he crosses his arms on purpose to bless the younger over the elder. So some of you will remember that. And as we come to chapter 49, I believe this happened the same day or very shortly thereafter. The Bible doesn't say. But I think when the message went out to Joseph that your father is sick, he's on hospice, and he doesn't have long. I believe that same time that Joseph got that message, I think all the boys got that message. And I think they all came the same day, and probably very shortly after Ephraim and Manasseh get the blessing that Jacob has for them, in comes the other boys. Now, when I picture this in my mind, I picture just the sons, not their wives or the rest of the family. It's probably not a room like we have today. Today, our rooms are a lot bigger. Our houses are a lot bigger than they were back then. But they made do with that. Anyway, I just picture these boys standing around their dad, not necessarily in age order, but some of them were. And you're going to see that as we look at the blessings that were given down. Now, this is prophetic. All of these things that Jacob is going to say, some of it won't make any never mind to you. It has nothing to do with you. But there's a message in it, and I'll share that with you as we get to the end of it. Assuming we make it all the way through. We should. Anyway, without further ado, Genesis chapter 49 and verse 1 says, Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Now, I do believe that God revealed the future to Jacob. And you'll see why I believe that in a moment. Aside from the fact that he tells them he's going to tell them what's coming, there's also so much evidence in these passages that there's no way he could have known these things except God revealed them to him. Verse 2, he says, Gather yourselves together, and hear ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your fathers. Which just basically means, listen, I need your attention right now. I want you to listen to me. And the reason that I bring that out is because we have a habit in this country, in this day and age, as people get older, we don't really listen anymore. In fact, a lot of times, we're just putting up with what we're hearing. I can honestly say that I didn't listen to my grandparents as much at the end as I should have. Sometimes there's something that they need to tell you, something you need to hear. And I guess, especially when you deal with somebody a lot, you'll get to where you're just tolerating them and just waiting for the end with them and not really listening anymore. And that's a danger. It's important. And if I had it to do over, I would have written down much of what my granddaddy had to say. He had so much wisdom. He had so much experience to share, so much that I needed to hear. And so I think that rather than just have them come in and be company, he needed them to hear not what he had to say, but what God had to say through him. He needed them to pay attention because in this there's blessings and also warnings. And because we're subject to some of these same things, we need to be aware of all of these blessings, but also all of these warnings. And so, looking at verse 3, Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. I happen to think Reuben was standing closest to Jacob's head. Remember that Jacob didn't see very well at this point in his life. He didn't see good at all. And so I don't know this, I can't prove this to you, but I happen to think Reuben, still trying to gain his father's favor, still trying to get his dad to be proud of him. There's those that go way overboard when they want you to be proud of them, and I just picture Reuben as being one of those. But he's standing, I think, closest to his father's head, and so when his father begins to talk to him, I think that's why he chose him first. Not necessarily because he's oldest, but maybe so. Anyway, he tells him, you're my firstborn, you're my might, and the beginning of my strength. And I think what that means is, starting out, he was all of what his father hoped he'd be. I think Reuben started out right. He was strong. He had potential. Obviously, according to this, there was excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. However, notice verse 4. Unstable as water. Thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up to thy father's bed, then defiledest thou it. He went up to my couch. Now, without getting graphic or long-winded about it, we've talked about what Reuben did. And you can study that if you'd like to know more about it. I'm not going to get into it now. Other than to say that what he did with his father's concubine was, it was sinful, it was shameful. And he pays for it. And not just him. But I'll have you know that as far as we know, there was never any Reubenites that were leaders over Israel. Never. For the rest of the history of Israel, as far as you read ahead, you don't ever find anybody that came from this tribe that amounted to anything important. And you'll also notice that when the tribe itself gets to the promised land, they're too lazy to even cross the Jordan. They said, look, we're just content to take this land on this side of Jordan. We'll stay here if that's all right with you. And Joshua told them, said, well, you can stay and dwell here if you want to, but you're still going to cross that river and fight with us for the rest of it. You'll get your land when everybody else gets theirs. You still have to come and fight. So it was kind of pointless to be lazy about it, but they just settled the first place they found. As soon as they got there, they didn't want to cross over. So anyway, it's not so much that he didn't want to bless Reuben. It's not so much that he didn't love Reuben, but that God revealed to him what was going to happen, and he's telling them these things, but he's also warning them. Let me put it this way. If you were told up front what was coming, you've got the ability and potential to change it. I'll say that, and I'll also say this. This is a prophecy toward Reuben himself and the tribe of Reuben, not the individuals in it. There's always the ability to break away from the mold and do better than what people think you're going to do. I stand before you as an example of this. For several generations on my father's side, there hadn't been anybody to speak of come out of my father's family. And I very easily could have traveled along that same path. Many on my dad's side have been to prison, have been done some shameful things. I mean, my last name's not the most popular last name there is in the area where I grew up. Now, my mother's side, completely different. Completely different. But on my dad's side, honestly, I could have followed a different path. And so just know that just because you're from the tribe of Reuben doesn't necessarily mean you have to fall into these things. So this warning is given so that those individuals can look at themselves and look at this prophecy and make up their own mind if they want to fall under that or if they want to do better than that. And so to the individual, there's hope, there's potential. But to the nation or tribe of Reuben, this was foretold. There's nothing you can do about that. But individually, this wasn't set in stone. And so I think the message there is, whatever you may think about this nation, we can still be individually, we can still do good and wonderful things. This nation may be doomed, I don't know. But that doesn't mean that we are individually. So I just use that for an example. Verse 5, Simeon and Levi are brethren. Now the reason they're listed together, Simeon and Levi are pretty tight. Of all the brothers, they seem to do everything together. And I think that had been that way all the way up until this moment. And he says, Simeon and Levi are brethren. They're also the next two in age order. Not all of them are in age order, but these two are. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. Now, do you remember, and we talked about this back in Genesis 29, do you remember what they did? Let me refresh your memory. It was those two who killed the whole city of Shechem. They conned all those men into being circumcised, and then while they were in their weakened position, they went in and murdered every last one of them. Now, I don't know how big this city was, but it doesn't matter. Even if it was a little city, there's still a lot of people that just murdered. And it caused a stain on Israel's name for a while. It caused them to have to look over the shoulder and probably cost them some fruitfulness in that region for quite some time. But anyway, they had the ability to be extremely cruel. Verse 6, O my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly. Mine honor be not thou united, for in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they digged down a wall. What he's saying here is, Don't let Israel be marked by the wickedness that they did. And he mentions their anger. They had anger issues. And they were selfish. And had their own self-will. And verse 7 says, cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. You know, it was one man that raped their sister, and I understand being angry about that. But it's taking it to an extreme when you punish a whole city for one man's activity. Now watch this. He says in verse 7, I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Two possible meanings of this. One is divide them from each other, because Simeon and Levi like to run together. They like to do these things together. And they probably had a following. I would imagine there's some servants and some friends that followed these guys. This was an early example of gang activity, if you want to be honest. Because they would gang up together and do whatever they wanted to and get away with it. And the best thing you can do with a gang is divide them up. Brother Mike can probably attest to this, but when you get a gang separated out to individuals, they're not nearly as brave. They're not. It's while they're together that they think they're strong. You get them divided up away from one another, they don't do all that wicked stuff. I know a guy right now who was in the Bandito gang. I saw that man get saved way over yonder in Comanche, Texas. I got to baptize him, praise God. And I've noticed that, you know, all the evil things he did when he was in that bike gang, once he got out of that gang, got off by himself, he turned into a pretty good guy. Pretty decent husband. He can't do anything about all the tattoos, but he's a pretty decent husband and father now. So individually, when you separate some of these wicked folks, they have potential to be worth something. The reason I say that is because with Simeon being divided up into, their inheritance gets divided up into Judah. And y'all know what happens to the Levites. They get divided amongst all the tribes. And when you get them all separated out, well, they can be good. You can get good out of them. And in fact, the Levites do some really good things. I've got a list of verses here I probably won't have time to go into, of examples of things that the Levites did for the Lord. See if I can see a couple of them. It was the Levites who redeemed themselves somewhat in their stand against idolatry in the days of Moses in Exodus 32. And then there's some other things they do that are listed here that honestly, if I took the time to list them all, we wouldn't get very far. So just suffice it to say that by dividing them up, God was able to get the potential out of them. And sometimes that's what He's got to do in our day and age. Some groups need to be separated. And some people need to be united. It just kind of depends. But I know when I was in school, if you put me and a certain other kid in the wrong area of the classroom, we'd just sit back there and chatter. Y'all can't imagine me doing that, I know. But,
No.
But the teacher had enough sense to separate us, and that put a stop to it. So anyway, you get where I'm going with that. Verse 8, Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he couched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be, binding his foal under the vine, and his ass's colt under the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, his teeth white with milk. We're going to go over some of this, just to give you an idea what this is talking about. First of all, it's obvious throughout the rest of Scripture that Judah is the leader. However, it's not until the days of King David, really, that you began to see it. 640 years pass until the majority of this prophecy is fulfilled. I'll give you one exception. You remember the two spies? And we'll talk about them at some point. But do you remember the two spies that were sent out to spy out the land? And 10 of them came back and said, we can't whoop them. They're like grasshoppers in the land. There's giants, man. We can't win. And 2 of them said, oh, yes, we can. And the Lord said we can, and we're ready to go. Let's do this thing. Now you'll remember the names of those two, I'm sure. Most of you anyway, were Joshua and Caleb. But most of you couldn't guess where they came from. Does anybody know what tribe Joshua was from? Not Joshua, no. But it's okay, I just asked to see if you knew. Joshua was from Ephraim, which is the second largest and the second most blessed of all the boys. We'll cover Ephraim in a minute. Caleb, however, was from the tribe of Judah. So Caleb is an early example of this prophecy because he was strong. In fact, the Bible says, I've often compared Brother Gary to Caleb because the Bible says Caleb was as strong at 80 years old as he was at 40. That's what the Bible says. God allowed Caleb to keep his strength because he honored God when the 12 spies went out. They spent 40 years in the wilderness, so that man had to spend 40 years being punished for what the rest of the group did. And so to honor him, God allowed him to keep his strength. And when they got to the promised land, God allowed Caleb to still be strong and a leader, and he inherited all this land. And anyway, God blessed Caleb. But Caleb was from the tribe of Judah. Anyway, aside from Caleb, there's not really another leader mentioned. In fact, notice this. Moses was from Levi. I've already mentioned Joshua was from Ephraim. Gideon was from Manasseh, the other Joseph tribe. Samson was from Dan. Samuel was from Ephraim. And Saul, the first king, is from Benjamin. So it's not until 640 years later, after this prophecy, that we see it fulfilled in King David. But from David on, Judah is it. In fact, to this day we call them Jews because of the tribe of Judah. And even Daniel was from the tribe of Judah, who was third ruler over all of Babylon at one point, and was a counselor to rulers of Babylon and Persia. So just to see how this was already fulfilled, fulfilled after David but before Christ, in people like Daniel and others like him. So anyway, lawgiver here, which we looked at in verse, is that verse 9? Verse 10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah. That's a reference to the king coming from that line. The lawgiver from between his feet literally means the one who decrees. And between his feet probably is a reference to his seed. Not to be ugly, but that's what that probably means. The word Shiloh here is interesting. Does anybody know where the tabernacle was set up in the Promised Land? It was set up at Shiloh. Now, I don't think that that was already named that. I think they named it that, and possibly because of this prophecy. But Shiloh is actually a picture of Jesus when he comes. A picture of he who would bring peace. In fact, that's kind of what it means. The name Shiloh has to do with the one who brings peace. Shiloh is a derivative of shalom, and we all know shalom means peace. So anyway, the one who brings peace would obviously be Christ. So I think this is an early reference to Messiah. That's why if your Bible's like mine, it's got a star by verse 10. Because this is a reference to Jesus. When it says the scepter shall not depart from Judah. And the Bible tells us that the Lord's reign would last forever. So anyway, he hasn't taken control of that reign yet, but when he does, it'll never depart from him. Until Shiloh come, which again I think is a reference to the one who brings peace, which is Christ. Unto him shall be the gathering of the people. Binding his fall under the vine. Now if I understand this reference in verse 11, this is talking about the plentifulness of the grapes and the vine. There's going to be so many vines as God blesses Israel that the colts of the donkeys are going to get stuck in them. This will be a common occurrence. Think about it this way. Those of you who have livestock, there's always something that's pretty regular with them that you've got to do. Always something you've got to deal with. Either you're getting caught up in a fence or something. And so it was real common. This prophecy may have to do with the fact that the vines would be so plentiful, they'd get caught up in them all the time. I can't think of any other reference that would be making, but we really don't know. There's another reference here made to washing his garments in wine and his clothes in the blood of grapes. Again, I think that just means you've got so many of them, you can wash your clothes in them. That's all. I mean, you can swim. You ever hear anybody talk about being able to swim in money? Me neither. But my son likes that goofy cartoon, DuckTales, and Uncle Scrooge McDuck is always diving in his what do you call that, vault, and he's swimming around in there, and it's just nothing but gold. I think of that when I think of this. There's so much wine because God blesses Judah to the point they've got enough of the grape juice to wash their clothes in it. So I think that's all it means. But anyway, I'll reread verse 11. Binding his foal under the vine, and his ass's colt under the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine, his clothes in the blood of grapes. Verse 12, his eyes shall be red with wine, and his teeth white with milk. I don't think this is a reference to drunkenness, although some theologians think it is. I don't, because it wouldn't fit with the rest of the prophecy. I think it just means that there's plenty of it to drink, and their teeth being white with milk means they're strong and full of calcium. They've got plenty of milk. This is just a reference to plenty. That God's going to bless Judah, and they're going to have plenty. I think that's all it means. And remember, Judah himself as a son wasn't the greatest example of godliness in his youth. But as he got older and wiser, I think he became the leader. We know that when we studied it, he was the one who was willing to sacrifice himself so that none of his other brothers would have to stay in the prison and they could all go home to daddy. So you see a difference in him. And his own first three children were disappointments to him. But he winds up with a good child who... or a set of twins actually, one of which is who Christ comes through. So there's a lot about Judah that I could go into, but basically through him all the nations will be blessed. That promise is passed down to him from Abraham, and then we see it fulfilled in Christ, and we're part of those nations that are blessed by him. The New Testament clearly identifies the Lord Jesus Christ with this prophecy concerning Judah, calling him the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Micah also refers to this prophecy in Micah 5, 2 through 5, when it talks about him being born in Bethlehem, Bethlehem being kind of the capital of Judah. And it talks about how he would bring peace in Micah 5, 2 through 5. There's a lot of other stuff that shows us the dominant nature of the tribe. I've already mentioned to you Daniel, but there's many, many others. We could talk all night just about the people who came out of the tribe that God did something with. And before, during, and after the captivity. All right, Zebulun. Look at verse 13. Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for an haven of ships, and his border shall be unto Zidon. That's all it says about Zebulun. We know very little about him. If I had a map, and I don't, this is something I would try to illustrate on the map, on the backdrop that we've got, if I had thought about it. But I don't know that Zebulun ever met its potential yet. We do know that it was somewhere between the Sea of Galilee and the Mediterranean Sea, but there was so much land that was supposed to belong to him that he doesn't fully ever take. And I think it's a reference probably to his unwillingness to go get it. He gets enough of it and then settles. And that was true of many of the tribes. When they get their land, when they get into the promised land, they don't all fulfill their potential. They don't all get the land, all of it that they're supposed to get. That's unusual to me. Because if you were inheriting land, any of you, and it was a lot of it, how many of you wouldn't go possess all of it? Think about that. If you had some land coming to you, I mean, for the mineral rights alone, if you had some land coming, you'd want all of it, right? It kills me that they were unwilling to go and possess all of it that they could. We know so little about Zebulun other than he's apparently a seafaring tribe and good with things, fishing and water and all of that. They wind up falling away later because probably their proximity to the Phoenicians, which is right north of them there. But anyway, that's all we know about Zebulun. There is a reference made to them in Matthew 4:13, which may suggest that their border extends to Capernaum on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. But we don't really know a lot about it other than Christ's public ministry spent a lot of time there in Capernaum. So just food for thought. Now look at Issachar right after it, verse 14. Some of these are not in order of age, but it's still something I want to show you. Issachar is a strong ass, couching down between two burdens. He saw the rest was good in the land, that it was pleasant, and bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant unto tribute. This is actually kind of sad because Issachar was strong. Strong like a donkey, but lazy. It says here he would enjoy the good and assigned land that was given to him, but he would not fight for it. So eventually he would be pressed into servitude. People around him would just come along and put him to a tax. And it was easier to pay the tax than to fight for the land, which is kind of sad. To have that kind of strength, but not have that kind of desire to fight. Listen, there's people like that in our country now. They don't want to rock the boat. They're happy with the fatness of the land. They don't want to fight to keep it what God intended it to be. We see these types even today. Historically, Issachar had rich lands and rich crops, which attracted marauders and captors, but there's very little to tell us that they ever fought for any of it or tried to maintain it. Next, the next four sons are not in age order. I think it's because of where they're standing in relation to Jacob. You're in the room, he's addressing you in the order you're standing near him, not necessarily in the order you were born. So the next one we see here is Dan. Dan has always been of special interest to me. And I've told you why. Does anybody remember? In the book of Revelation, when it lists the 12 tribes and the 144,000, Dan is left out. I don't know why for sure. But I have a theory about it. It's possible the Antichrist will come from the tribe of Dan. And another reason I think that may be, and I don't expect you guys to know this, but I'll share it with you. Later, when the country splits, by the way, does anybody remember when they split, which two nations they split into? After David, and then after Solomon, rather, the nation split. You had one big unified country of Israel, and it splits, northern and southern.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody remember what they're called?
Judah and Israel.
Judah and Israel. What name is synonymous with Israel out of all these tribes? Anybody? I'll help you. Ephraim. Ephraim and Israel become synonymous at one point. If you said Ephraim, you were talking about Israel. If you said Israel, you were talking about Ephraim. The guy who split the country was from Ephraim. His name is Jeroboam, Jeroboam 1. Jeroboam did not want the nations to get back together. He wanted it to split. He didn't want it to get back together. So he set up a idol at the southernmost border at Bethel, which is sad because Bethel meant house of God. But he set up a golden calf at Bethel. He set another one up in Dan. Dan is in the northernmost border, right before you get into Syria. By the way, there's some interesting stuff about Dan regarding their border with Syria. But just know this. He set up one in both places, so if you lived in Israel, you could go and worship without going to Judah, and he put one conveniently located in the northern end of his territory and the southern end of his territory. Now, because Dan became symbolic with that idol worship there, another reason maybe that Dan represents Satan and the Antichrist later. I'll read to you where I get some of this from. Genesis 49:16 says, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way. Who else is recognized as a serpent? Satan. So you see where I get some of this. So he's going to be a judge to his people as one of the tribes, but he's also going to be a serpent by the way. Do y'all remember who in the book of Judges was from the tribe of Dan? Samson was. That's right. So when it says he shall judge his people, I think that's a reference to Samson. But later, he shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that biteth the horse's heels, so that his rider shall fall backwards. I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. Now, I think the serpent by the way, or adder, in addition to a reference maybe to idolatry and turning your back on God, and maybe even a reference to the coming Antichrist, but there's also the possibility that because of their relation to their enemies, they had to be really cunning and wily in their fighting. I was watching a documentary today on some of the wars Israel's fought since it became a nation again. There's one in 48, one in 67, the Six-Day War, one in 73, Yom Kippur War. And you'll notice that when they get attacked, it's these outlying areas that have the hardest time. So anyway, whether you're talking about them as a people or them as a region, they had to be really cunning in their fighting. They had to have the ability to beat their enemy any way they could. And if the only way they could win was by taking the horses' heels out from under them, well, so be it. So anyway, it's just a reference maybe to the way they fight and some of the things they fight for, and the fact that I think possibly they've just been a thorn in the side of Israel as far as following the Lord goes. Even Samson, as a leader, had some really bad habits that kept him from being a good leader, as you might remember. Number 19, Gad. A troop shall overcome him. It's funny because I think if I remember right, Gad means troop, doesn't it? I think when we studied the names and the boys, Gad meant troop. So it's funny that a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last. We really don't know much about that passage. I've got some notes here, but nothing that gives us much information at all. It's just Gad's region was on the east of Jordan with Reuben. There was another group that didn't want to come across the Jordan, so Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh and Reuben are all on the east side of the River Jordan. And so probably because they fought a lot with the Ammonites and other desert peoples, they were easily open to attack, but they were also able to fight back. So this is just maybe a reference to the fact they would lose their land and gain it back, lose their land and gain it back. So anyway, that's just all I have about that. Verse 20, out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. Asher was supposed to enjoy rich food and royal delicacies. Their lot fell on the rich northern seacoast north of Mount Carmel. You'll remember Mount Carmel's where Elijah stood. It was greener. They had more grain there. They had more water there. That's why everybody migrated to that area when Elijah stood on Mount Carmel and burned the sacrifice in front of them. They were searching for water and food, and everybody wound up in that area. It was the most fertile area. It's called the Jordan River Valley. It was the most fertile area that there was. So in Asher's heyday, they were kind of the ritzy ones. That was the ones that got all the riches other than Judah. All the way up to Tyre and Sidon. Anyway, they failed to even take possession of their region. And again, their proximity to the Phoenicians were probably their undoing. We come to Naphtali, verse 21. Is a hind let loose, he giveth goodly words. That hind let loose has something to do with speed and swiftness. They were known for having warriors that were quick on their feet. Also, they were composers of eloquent speech and beautiful literature. Evidently, Naphtali himself was of a good temperament. There's nothing specifically said about him in Scripture. However, the best known of his descendants was a guy named Barak. This is not Obama. Barak, who was with Deborah and won a mighty victory over Jabin and Sisera of the Canaanites. That's in Judges 4, 6 through 15. So anyway, this was one of his descendants. But mainly men from his own tribe and that of Zebulun were supposedly good with words and quick on their feet. This is about all we know about them. Finally, we turn to Joseph and Benjamin. Now, what? Joseph is divided into Ephraim and Manasseh. So when you look at these two tribes, that's representative of Joseph. That's not one tribe, it's two. So verse 22 says, Joseph is a fruitful bow, even a fruitful bow by a well, whose branches may run over the wall. You guys have a map in the back of your Bible that shows these tribes? If you do, I'll show you something. If you don't, just bear with me a minute. But if you'll notice the size of Ephraim and Manasseh, Manasseh was actually split in two. If you look, it was the largest tribe by far, except for Judah. And they're actually comparable. Ephraim starts out relatively small, but later it's identified with all of Israel, so in a way it grows. But these are huge. They're big areas of land. So God just blessed these areas. So when he said Joseph is a fruitful bow, he's talking about these two tribes together take up a good portion of the land. He says, even a fruitful bow by a well, whose branches run over the wall, which is just a reference to how he blessed them. The archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him, but his bow, spelled differently here, abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. There's quite a bit to this that I'm going to run out of time trying to mention. But let me just share with you a few of the leaders from these two tribes. These are from Joseph, which is, again, combined Manasseh and Ephraim. These are many of Israel's leaders. Joshua, first of all, who was a great military leader. Deborah, who's in the Judges. Samuel, y'all remember Samuel. He's the prophet that was born of Hannah, who anointed Israel's first king. These are all from Ephraim. Gideon and Jephthah were both from Manasseh. Both these tribes were strong in war, and their lands were fertile and productive. I already told you about Jeroboam, who divided the kingdom. He was from Ephraim. So there's some dominant divisions in these tribes, and they go on to have great influence over Israel. And then finally we come to Benjamin. Let me finish reading. Verse 25. Even by the God of thy father who shall help thee, and by the Almighty who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors, and under the utmost bound of the everlasting hills they shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. Let me just say that the two biggest blessings that he gave were to Judah and to Joseph. Now watch this. Most of the physical blessing went to Joseph. Most of the spiritual blessing went to Judah. But they both were mightily blessed. Judah being spiritually blessed because Messiah would come from Judah. Joseph being materially, physically blessed by all the things that God does for those two tribes. Or that one that's represented by two tribes. All right, Benjamin, verse 27. Benjamin shall raven as a wolf in the morning. He shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. It's a sad thing to see, because you would expect Benjamin to be the favorite son. He's the baby, and he's out of Rachel. But the tribe itself, we're not talking about Benjamin himself, we're talking about the tribe, winds up being pretty cruel. There's a really ugly story in Judges 20 that I'm not going to tell you about right now. If you want to read it, read it. But I'll tell you before you read it, it's pretty gruesome. And it was perpetrated by the tribe of Benjamin. And it almost cost them their very identity as one of the tribes. In fact, it wasn't just the tribe of Benjamin that had the ability to be cruel. The first king over Israel was Saul, who was a Benjamite. His character is just exactly like this prophecy we're going to read. So as we read this, think about some of the cruel things Benjamin as a tribe did, and think about Saul, who was head and shoulders above everybody else. And we'll close with a few of these thoughts, and I'm through. I've already read you verse 27, so I'll read you verse 28. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is it that their father spake unto them, and blessed them, every one according to his blessing he blessed them. You may read that and think, wait a minute, some of that didn't sound much like a blessing. But remember I told you, there was a warning along with it. This was not saying individually every one of these was going to turn out this way. It was just a look at the future of how he knew they would turn out. But individually, there's always a choice. That's like somebody looking at me and saying, Chad, you're never going to amount to anything. Your daddy died in prison, your granddaddy was of this, and your great-granddaddy was of that, and you're just not going to amount to anything. Well, you can tell me that till the cows come home. But I have an individual responsibility to make the effort to do something different, to do something for God, to make something of myself, and to make every effort to make something of my children. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter who I am, my children are going to be whoever they choose to be. I hope that they follow the Lord. I hope that He can use them. But there's also the possibility that they could turn and run from the Lord. I don't know. I don't know. But I know with given these blessings and given these warnings, you have the opportunity to hear the warning and do something different. When people told me I wouldn't amount to anything, you know what it did for me? It motivated me to make sure that I didn't fall into that trap and be like they thought I'd be. And it's sad that anyone would ever tell a kid that, but it happens. Verse 29, he charged them and said unto them, I am to be gathered unto my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with a field of Ephron of the Hittite after possession of a burying place. We talked about all that when we studied it in Genesis 23. I'm not going to backtrack. It's the only land I remember Abraham ever buying. Verse 31, there they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. Now you'll remember, Rachel was buried in Bethlehem. She's not there, but Leah is. Verse 32, the purchase of the field and of the cave that is therein was from the children of Heth. I think it's interesting, he didn't ask to be buried by his favorite wife Rachel. He was asked to be buried by his fathers, and by the wife he was supposed to have, his first wife, should have been his only wife. And I think this was God's guidance. I think if he was being selfish, he said, bury me next to Rachel. I don't care about all these other folks. But I think with God leading him, and at the end of his life, him understanding that God was leading him, he chose to be buried by his wife and his fathers. Verse 32, the purchase of the field and of the cave that is therein was from the children of Heth. And then Jacob, when Jacob had made an end of commanding his sons, he gathered up his feet into the bed and yielded up the ghost and was gathered unto his people. I honestly think shortly after he said these words, it tired him out. He curled up in the bed and he passed away. Now, again, I said when I started, a great bit of this doesn't seem like it's very helpful. In fact, it may have put you half to sleep. And I'm sorry for that. I know that it may be completely uninteresting to some. But everything God put in here has a purpose behind it. And if you don't get anything else out of it, just remember, God sees the future, and God knows what will happen to us, to America, and to all the nations round about us. But just because something's going to happen to a nation doesn't mean it hasn't happened to the individual. I remember in Luke 2, there's a reference to a woman from the tribe of Asher. Her name is Anna. She's a prophetess in the temple. And she was permitted, because of her faithfulness, to see Jesus shortly after he was born, when he was dedicated. And God allowed her, as an individual from the tribe of Asher, to be distinctive amongst her tribe. In fact, she's the only one that stands out in my mind in all of Scripture from the tribe of Asher. And she's remembered fondly. She's remembered in a good context. And everybody individually can be too. No matter what tribe you're from, no matter what family you're from, no matter what community you came out of. So anyway, with all that being said, I hope you got something out of all of that. And if you didn't, it's my fault for not presenting it better, because it's beautiful. And it's got a lot of beautiful things in it. We will close out our study of Genesis next week in chapter 50. And I'll show you some stuff that I think is pretty interesting. And then we're going to look at Moses. And as we study through Exodus, we're not going to go through every detail. We're going to study it a little differently. You'll see what I'm talking about when we get there. I hope it'll be much more interesting. I'm also going to try to start incorporating some illustrations that we can use our screen for. And I think it'll make it more interesting. So pray for me as I try to get better at that. Anything to mention, ask, or add before we get out of here?